ask you a question, and that is, what is in your life's blueprint?
This is Jeremy Till, the host of the Operator Podcast. We'll be taking you on a journey with us, interviewing some of the top performers in their field on how they operate and get the job done. At the end of the day, we want to be our best. We're going to help provide the information, the data, and the science of how to achieve that, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Let's go! Let's go! Our next guest is Mike Cazayoux, the owner, co-founder of Brute Strength. Mike was a pleasure to have on the podcast, a new Austinite here in the last year. We go back getting to compete against each other in 2012 at the CrossFit Games. He was a young buck, new to the sport, and he gets to share his journey just really in life of how he went from being in recovery into the sport of CrossFit, into the entrepreneurial world of building business. Mike has a phenomenal podcast, the Brute Podcast, and also training protocols for athletes wanting to compete. All sorts of different programs for you to get involved in. So check out his content online. So let's enjoy this podcast, and we'll see you on the other side. Man, I want to start out this artwork on your arm. What do you got there? When did you start getting ink on your arm?
I started getting this tattoo summer of 2015, I think. Yeah, 2015. I have a couple on my back, but this one started, and it took about a year. I lived in a different... I was moving all around, and the tattoo artist was moving all around, so it took about a year and a half to get it all done, and I had to do like 8-hour sessions every time. It was absolutely miserable. Yeah.
So for our listeners that are obviously on audio, tell us a little bit about your artwork. It looks like maybe Japanese, a little bit of inspiration.
It is Japanese artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was actually inspired by a psychedelic experience that I had, where I had a woman watching over me, making sure I was safe, and I came out of this very like trippy experience, and when I looked up at her, I felt like my heart just exploded with love. And I can never fully explain the feeling that I had that day, but I felt so connected to her and her husband who was around, and also I just had this feeling like we're all connected. And I just thought to myself, I never want to lose that feeling and that concept, because it's so important. I want to live my life treating others with respect and creating value for them. And to do that, I have to feel connected to them. So it was just an extremely like powerful feeling that was, it affected my life like in an extreme way for like a month. But it's just something that I think about constantly. So it was a very, very powerful experience.
Interesting. So, from just opening with that is interesting in the sense that I know you moved from Louisiana to Salt Lake City, and you went into treatment as a teenager. And I don't know if are you open to sharing about that experience and whatnot?
Oh, absolutely.
Not maybe the details, but just kind of telling about your story and journey. So I know people that experience hallucinogenics and different drugs like that. I don't know if that was a part of that lifespan or another journey in your life. Kind of tell us about that process.
Yeah, so as a teenager, I really didn't discriminate against any drugs. Anything I could get in front of me, I would take. And it started as a very social thing. I just, I wanted to be one of the cool kids, and I never had that. I never had any sort of fear over drugs. So I was always looking for the next biggest high. And around 15 is when I started to develop like an actual dependence on painkillers and benzos. And from there, it progressively got worse, where I had this physical dependency and actual addiction. And it really got bad with especially opiates, to the point where my parents thought it was time for me to be sent off to rehab. And at that point, I felt like I was so out of control. I wasn't necessarily trying to quit a lot, but I knew that my life was headed basically nowhere. And you know, I had two real outcomes that I could reach that way. I could either end up in prison because I had killed someone in a car accident or some other kind of mistake, or I could wind up dead because at 17, I had already had 3 close friends pass away due to drugs, 3 of my close friends. And so I knew those were the options for me. So I knew part of me accepted when they said, "Hey, we're sending you off," like part of me accepted it, and part of me still wasn't ready. So over the next year and a half, I went to a few different treatment centers, and you know, we can definitely go into more of that if you would like. But long story short, somewhere along the way, I started to take ownership of my own recovery and my own life, mostly because of the love and support that my parents showed me, and I didn't want to let them down. And it just transformed my life. You know, the therapy, the especially group therapy, sharing and being vulnerable with my peers completely transformed my life and is kind of the base and foundation of everything that's valuable to me today.
So, I mean, the opiate epidemic that's going across America right now, I know like Ohio and different states are just plagued with this, you know, issue. What is that like, just like from a first-hand experience, being addicted and having that lifestyle, you know, what does that really look like in just a snapshot of like an abuse standpoint and taking it and living out life, you know, out of control? Like, what does that kind of look like?
I mean, it's like anything else. You don't just wake up one day going from completely sober to, you know, taking hundreds of dollars of opiates a day. It's a progression. And personally, I started making, you know, I grew up with this very strong set of values and morals that my parents had instilled in me. And over time, I just started to give up every single one of those values, right? Because, whether it be I had to steal money to support the drug addiction, or I had to do something to cover up the shame I was feeling, I slowly just gave up every single one of those values one by one until my whole life, like all I thought about was, how am I going to get high? When am I going to get high again? At my worst, I mean, it was waking up and doing some kind of line or shooting up some kind of opiate. If I was still in school, it looked like me going to the bathroom a dozen times every single day and doing the same thing in a bathroom stall. Even when I played sports, I would get loaded before and right after practice or games. There was not a single moment that went by where at least part of me wasn't thinking about when and where am I going to get high.
It was all consuming.
Right.
And so you're an athlete, you know, multi-team games, CrossFit Games winner. I know Hackenbrook, all that good stuff. We're going to get into that. Tommy and all the stuff y'all have done there. But, like, what was sports like? Because you're an athlete. What did sports look like in junior high and high school in this, like, period?
Like amidst that whole drug addiction and everything?
Yeah.
It really took a back seat. I mean, I at 4 or 5 years old, I was already, like, playing with as many balls as I can get my hands on and always wanted to be playing sports. But around 9 or 10 years old, I went from thinking that the biggest sports stars in my area were the cool kids to the bad kids were the cool kids for whatever reason. And it became more important to me to be liked and accepted. And I thought being the cool kid, the bad kid, was going to get me that acceptance. So at some point I started looking up to a different sort of person. And so it really just took a back seat to my drug addiction, right? Like I always was involved in sports, but only if I could continue getting high, right? And I didn't practice very hard in high school. I didn't play very hard. It was just something that I did for a little bit of fun. I wasn't really on the path of mastery of any sort.
You played football,
baseball, soccer.
Did the coaches know you were taking drugs? You were on drugs?
None of them knew that I was loaded while playing, but I was getting in a lot of trouble around the school and the city, and so they definitely knew that I was a drug user.
That's interesting. And nothing, no one stepped in or in the process.
Well, a lot of people stepped in.
Okay,
actually.
got it.
Yeah, I mean, my parents stepped in when starting at 14. Numerous teachers stepped in. I had coaches come and pull me off to the side. I had people from AA meetings or sober friends of my parents, and a drug addict is not ready until he's ready. And I just wasn't ready. I couldn't see the problems that I was creating were a result of what I was doing. I thought everyone was just out to get me. And so I just wasn't ready to hear any of it.
Got it. So at 17, your parents like, hey, it's time to go to rehab. Salt Lake City, there's a place to go. So kind of tell us about that and what, you don't have to necessarily get into details of that, but just the transition and then what was post-recovery.
So you want to know about the...
Well, when your parents sent you out there,
Yeah.
like just the transition of being like, okay, it's time to go. You shared that, and then you went to Salt Lake. What was it? How long was that time frame you were in recovery, and then when you got out, what was next?
Okay, so yeah, when I left, it was a huge turning point in my life where I really felt like, okay, now I'm on my own, because my parents told me, like, this is it for you. Like, this is your last shot. If you're going to continue using drugs, you can't live with us. We support you in recovery, but if you're not in recovery, then, we can't continue supporting you. So I really had to take accountability for my own life. And over the next year and a half, I went to 3 different treatment centers. I went to a wilderness therapy in southern Utah, then an inpatient treatment center, and then kind of a transition house. And at the end of, while I was in the transition house, I had been sober for about a year. And I trained really hard and ran a marathon as my first. I had gotten into running in rehab, and so kind of got hooked, ran a marathon. That was like a really good goal for me to strive towards. And when I was done with that, I really felt like I had no goal and no purpose. I was going to a lot of AA meetings and stuff like that, but nothing that really stimulated me. And within literally a month, I had relapsed. I had isolated myself. I had become depressed to the point where I thought the best thing to do was to get loaded. And it was way worse than it ever was as a kid, like a year and a half before. I went straight back to what I was using and more within 24 hours. And that thank God only lasted a week before I said, what the hell am I doing? Like, I can't keep this up. Everybody's gonna leave me. I don't want this. And so I got sober again, and that was about 9 years ago, and I haven't touched opiates since.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So, in movies or anything, you see people coming off of an addiction, and it just looks like hell. And so, like, what was that like in getting off opiates?
It was incredibly miserable. So I went not only cold turkey off of drugs, but they sent me straight to a wilderness therapy program, which was in the high desert in February. So I'm withdrawing, like, as I'm sleeping in my own little like tarp that I made for myself in a sleeping bag in like -20, -30 degrees every single night. Nonstop sweating and pains everywhere. It's really hard to explain if you haven't been there, but it's the most depressing, like, miserable experience you can imagine. Just physical, emotional, everything.
The pains of the body, like, I mean, I've experienced migraines and stuff like that. Like, would you equate like non-ending migraine headache type of body trembling? Like,
it can be, but it's more the physical is more like below the shoulders, right? You feel too hot, you feel too cold, you feel stabbing pains, you feel nauseous, your stomach is messed up, all of that kind of stuff.
And it doesn't end. It like is for a set period of time that this withdrawals occurred.
Right. The longer you've been using, the more you've been using, the longer it's going to last. For me, it was intense for about 2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days. Nonstop. Oof. What was going through your head?
This is what I need. I mean,
did you have a mantra that was going over and over and over as you were coming off?
No, not really. But I mean, I had been removed from opiates for a couple days prior to before I got out into the desert. So thankfully it started then. But I just thought to myself, like, this is exactly what I need. And I had no choice. Like if I had been at my house, I'm sure I would have gone and gotten loaded. But I knew I had no choice. There was no getting out of the situation I was in. So I kind of just surrendered.
That's a powerful word. And there's people watching you or taking care of you?
Yeah, so there was 5 staff members and about 14 other kids.
Whoa, that's powerful, man. That's good. So as you transitioned from there, you relapsed, and then 9 years clean. When did you, from getting clean, when did you find CrossFit?
I had started it. I was introduced to it before that relapse by my buddy Bryce. I did it for a couple weeks, and then I relapsed, and I didn't find it again for several months because I started smoking cigarettes again, and then I was just I wasn't focused on fitness at all. I just wanted to get and stay sober, and I was smoking cigarettes, and I just didn't. It seemed like it wasn't for me, right? It's so aerobically driven that I was scared of it. And about 6 months after I was sober again, I gave it another shot. And a week in, I said, I can't do both of these. I can't smoke and do CrossFit. So one of them has to go. And luckily, I also had a girlfriend at the time that was really pushing me to quit. And that was the last time I smoked a cigarette. It was like, I don't know, 8 years ago.
Awesome. So what was your journey from finding CrossFit and then becoming a competitive athlete? Because I clearly remember you from the 2012, CrossFit Games, and you were very quiet, real stoic. And I mean, I don't remember seeing you say a word really. And I don't know if that was your competitor, face, or if you were more reserved back then. I mean, now you're very public and, you communicate, you have your podcast. So like, what was it? Where was that? What was the year that you found CrossFit and then getting into the competition side of things?
I think 2009 is when I found it, or like when I started up again. And for that first year, I just went to the CrossFit classes because I was literally the worst in the gym. I couldn't beat a single person. I wasn't, even though I had played sports growing up, I didn't pick up double unders immediately. I didn't pick up kipping pull-ups immediately. It took me a really long time. And added, I was really skinny from using drugs and having run a marathon. So I lost all the strength I had built over the years. And so it took me a really long time to learn everything and to, get bigger and stronger. And I don't think I even knew what the CrossFit Games were until probably December of that year, probably a full year later. And in January, I participated in, what was it called? It's a Salt Lake City event that Tommy used to put on. I forget the name of the event, but for most of the day, I was in first place. I was beating Tommy, and with like 2 or 3 events left, he beat me at all of them because that's where all of the strength events were. But I had done well enough to kind of catch his eye, and so at the end of the competition, he invited me and my training partner that also did really well in that competition to move over to Ute CrossFit and train with him. And he said, we should start a team. And so we did that about a month later. And that's when I took being a competitor very seriously. Later that year, probably a few months later, we went to regionals, did really well, went to the games and placed 9th. And that was the year before we started what was called Hacks Pack. So the next year is when Tommy joined and Taylor joined and Adrian, and we had a really solid team.
And so you went, you said, so y'all won. What years did y'all win?
12 and 13.
12 and 13. Okay. And then did you do individual in 14?
No. After 13, I had a back surgery and hadn't competed again until this year. Okay.
So what happened with your back?
So I was born with a genetic predisposition or disorder called spondylolisthesis. A lot of people call it spondy. So it's like a instability of the spine at some level, and a lot of people have it. I think 10% of people have it, but most never know because they don't push themselves to a place where they would learn that. But playing football growing up, doing powerlifting, and then CrossFit really pushed it over the edge. I had gotten to the point where I couldn't feel below my knees in the morning, and I had constant pain in my glutes and my low back. And they said, if you keep, like, you're really one bad power clean away from like what they call drop foot or becoming impotent, right? It was really cutting off my nerves, and I was at risk for some serious injury.
That's intense. That's real intense.
Yeah. So
you have an intense life, bro. That's good. So, but coming back to that competitor, were you a quieter person in that time period, or
I don't think I've ever been quiet.
Yeah.
But I'm used to leading. And on that team, I was a follower, right? Tommy was the natural leader. He had the most experience. He owned the gym. He was the best. So I was a follower. And I think back then, especially, and still today, I have more to learn about being a follower. Like I definitely don't shut down, but I'm not the same person when I'm not leading, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, I was a little more, I didn't feel like I belonged as much, and I felt a little out of place. Everybody's better than me, like all of this stuff,
Gotcha.
All this internal chatter.
Got it. And so now kind of moving into where we are, with the creation of Brute and like what you've done with your online program. So tell us how you transitioned and really created the program that you're currently operating in.
So it really started when I, quote unquote, retired from CrossFit. It was perfect timing. I was working at LSU at the time as a strength and conditioning coach, and Tommy invited me to buy one of his gyms in Salt Lake City. So I moved back, and at the time, actually, I'll back up for a second. At LSU, people were contacting me to program for them individually. And so, they would pay me on PayPal or something like that, and I would send them Google documents, and that was the extent of it, right? And we would email back and forth. That was the whole like coaching experience. And Tommy knew that I was doing that. And so when I moved back, he said, why don't we use the Hacks Pack name, the Ute name, and make this thing a little bit bigger. And so Matt Bruce and I, Matt was doing the programming with me at the time. He was a 7-time world team weightlifter for the U.S., and he's from Baton Rouge. So we were doing the programming together. So the three of us started this new company, and Matt came up with the name Brute. So Matt Bruce and Ute. Got it?
Got it.
So at the time, I was completely focused on the gym, and I really thought online programming was gimmicky and it was kind of silly. Like, no one's going to really buy this kind of thing. And really, I just wanted to work with people in person, right? That's where I felt I was best, and that's what I felt passionate about. And over the next 6 months, I started to see the kind of reach that you can have online, and I realized like I can actually have a huge impact on people's lives, even though I don't see them in person. So the combination of being able to impact people in lots of different ways, right? Not just physically doing like personal training and coaching, but lots of different ways, and using this online platform combined with the like exponentially larger reach that social media has and everything like that than a regular gym, it completely flip-flopped. So I decided not to buy the gym and go full. I decided to go in full to Brute, and that was in the beginning of 2015.
Awesome. And also when you were out training with Tommy, weren't y'all working with, how am I going to blank on it?
Jim Jones?
Jim Jones.
Yes.
Now
So Rob McDonald at Jim Jones coached us for all 3 years that we went to the games.
And how was that? Because it's a funny dynamic, when with Jim Jones and CrossFit and Mark Twight and all that. So how was that with that perspective?
I mean, I didn't think about it a single time. I really, really trusted him as a coach. He just had our buy-in from day one, right? I knew that he understood it from a exercise science standpoint, but also that he'd been there as an athlete. Rob is a former UFC fighter. He's coached lots of professional athletes, lots of SEALs and different operators and stuff like that. So we were just really bought into him as a coach, and having him come over to the gym a couple times a week when we were really training and leading up to events, it brought this new level out of all of us that we really, really valued, and I don't think we could have had he not been a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when Tommy, you decided you weren't going to buy the gym and you were going to go into Brute, and then from 15 to 17, you've seen that thing, really scale, and now you're relocated to Austin, working all online. So what's the last 2 years have been in building that business and going all in with, online?
It's been amazing, man. It's for me, like I'm always someone that I want to have my hands in 20 different projects at once, and I want to be learning a million different things in different areas of my life. And so it allows me to do all of that, right? Fill that cup. I guess the theme of the past 2 years has been putting together a team of people working in their unique ability, right? Doing what they're best at, so that we can have a very high performing team. I was lucky enough very early on, before we even started Brute, to go to the Barbell Shrugged Mastermind, and they shared this idea with me of doing what you're best at and then hiring out every single other thing. So as soon as we could afford to hire other coaches for other programs that I couldn't be as involved with, we did that. As soon as we could afford to hire a producer, we did that. As soon as we could hire someone to deal with operations and customer service, we did all of that. And that allowed me to focus at the time on the coaching and communication aspect, as well as marketing this thing and dealing with social media and all of that kind of stuff. So it's been a process of continually focusing on what I'm best at and trying to find other people that pick me up where I'm weak.
Mm-hmm. And you've really been able to scale and build that over the last couple of years, and really become from a technician, a program, to an entrepreneur. And so going through the Barbell Mastermind group, and was that kind of your first introduction to really thinking from an entrepreneurial standpoint? What was that bridge like for you? Because I kind of hear that shift into the entrepreneurial building of a business.
100%. Before that, it's so funny because before that mastermind, I hadn't read a single business book. None of the people I looked up to owned businesses. I grew up thinking business owners are crooks, right? They're salesmen and they're just trying to like get something out of you. Not at all understanding what any of that means, but that was what I really believed. And yeah, going to that mastermind completely shifted it for me. They were talking about things not from a making money standpoint, but creating value for other people in exchange for money standpoint. They like everything that they were saying and doing, kind of exemplified that. I knew that they really cared about people. And so that's kind of why they had my buy-in to listen to everything that they were saying. I knew they weren't crooks. And in fact, I knew they cared about people a lot more than a lot of the people I look up to do. And so it was this huge turning point to me. And they introduced me to, things like the book, The E-Myth, Drive by Daniel Pink, and all of these different things that have become like the foundation of myself as an entrepreneur and leader today.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us about Brute and all the different facets or whatever facets you'd like to speak to for our audience, so they know about what you do.
So some of the different programs?
Yeah, programs, what y'all's primary focus, what's the business look like?
So we started by just sharing the same programming that we used, more or less, to get to the games and win the games, with a few different additions. And that was called, now that's called games prep. At the time, that's just what we offered, right? It was individual programming or rather small group programming. From there, we branched out into what we call Brute Compete, which is a program for people that want to do better in the open, but they don't have 3 or 4 hours a day to train, right? We give them all of the same progressions, all of the same resources and coaching and everything like that, but it takes 60 to 90 minutes a day to complete. From there, and all along the way, we're just trying to listen to what our customers want and create products for them, right? Rather than creating something that we want, right? And hoping that people like it, we just listen to the feedback that people give and create something for us. So the biggest piece of feedback that we were getting was, I really, really want to compete. I love competing, but I don't have that much time to compete or to train every day. So I have to quit because I'm just not getting even half of the work done. So that's why we created that other program. The next big one that we created was called Brute Body. And this came out of something that when I was running that gym, one of the most common questions that I'm sure you can relate to as a CrossFit gym owner is people are what drives a lot of people to start at a CrossFit gym is to look better naked, right? They maybe aren't comfortable in their skin, or they're comfortable but they want a six pack, or somewhere in between, right? From I don't feel good to I just want to feel better. And I realized like we don't really offer anything like that other than a little bit of, here's what the paleo diet is and go do it, right? And so this is when I'm running that gym. So me and the guy that was running it with me, Jake Hutton, we had the idea to do what we called a body transformation class. And we were going to include, what we knew to be the fastest, in terms of training, the fastest way to change someone's body, mixed with some very aggressive carb cycling programs, and just see how it went. We had done it personal training. We had worked with collegiate athletes up to that point who have to make, significant body transformations. And so we thought, this will probably work with the CrossFit population. I think we had 40 members from our gym sign up, and it was absolutely explosive for that community. They just loved it. They were fired up to do that kind of training, and the diets were working way faster than anything they had ever tried. So the people got amazing results. And when we started Brute, at some point it clicked for either him or I, because he was working with me on Brute as well, to just try that with Brute and see how it went. And since then, that's been our most popular program, which is not too surprising, right? Everyone wants to look better naked to a certain extent, and it's something that doesn't really exist in the CrossFit scene still to this day. So it kind of fills a unique niche for people. Mm-hmm. In general, what we're focused on in our company is, rather than when we first started, I was so caught up in trying to get more people without, and we would just create a program and then just try to get more people on the program. Now we're focused on what can we do for the people that we already have to improve their experience. This is from a financial and business standpoint. I know how much cheaper it is to keep a current customer than to get a new one. So it's a great business decision, right? But more so, I'm in this because I want to make a difference. I want to feel connected to people. And I want it to fulfill the sense of purpose. And if I'm just doing it to get more people or make more money, then I lose interest in that sort of thing really quickly. And that's kind of why I got out of collegiate strength and conditioning, because that didn't do it for me. It might do it for some, but it didn't do that part for me. And so we're really just focused on trying to improve the experience for every one of our members, which has been a fun process for us and very fulfilling.
Oh, that's awesome. And so those are the main channels that people come and get involved with you. And then you have the Brute podcast that you're doing. What, you have 60, 70 productions so far? How many have you loaded?
100.
Y'all just hit 100.
I think we might have released maybe the 101, but yeah, right around there. Yeah.
Nice. And how has that been for the evolution, getting into the podcast and doing that? How's that been for you?
Well, I started it just because Mike Bledsoe told me I should, which is the Barbell Shrug host.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, at the time I knew nothing about being on camera or audio or anything like that. And the first 10 episodes, actually even before that, man, I was so terrified to do this that I would cancel some of them and make up the wildest excuses of why. And I believed it, but I was just so scared that I canceled some of them, to get out of it. And the first 10 of them, I was just terrified. I was shitting my pants, man. And it's been it's taught me this lesson of just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And in fact, that can almost be like a beacon of the things that you should do, because it's obviously important to you. And, speaking and and being in front of people, it actually is one of the skills that I've wanted to build more than anything else. And that's why I've been so afraid of it, right? It's so important to me that I created this big monster in my head of, oh my God, what will people think? I don't know what I'm doing, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, so it's been an amazing experience for that alone, but it's also given me the chance to meet a lot of people that I wouldn't have otherwise met, to learn an enormous amount of things that I probably wouldn't have sought out had I not done the podcast. And as of a year ago, and this is before it even grew to what it has become now, it was already the number one way that people were hearing about us. So I knew it was a great thing for our business as well. And the coolest thing to me is that the emails I get about the podcast are rarely ever, thank you so much for sharing this, like my mile time has improved or I've gotten so much stronger. But the emails that I get are like, your conversation with Craig Ballantyne on morning routines has like completely changed my life and allowed me to spend more time with my kids later in the day. And, thank you for sharing about your or about vulnerability with so-and-so, or about overcoming fear with so-and-so. So it's like, to me, it sounds like much more impactful stuff, which again, going back to this whole thing about wanting to feel fulfilled by my job, the podcast has just been such a great outlet to fill that cup for me, right? Because our programs we're dealing with fitness and performance, and so we don't have as many opportunities to talk about that kind of stuff, right? So it's been an amazing opportunity for me.
Yeah, and I know on your podcast y'all talk more on the side of self-development and positive mental attitude, and kind of like if you use that, if that makes sense. But how do you incorporate that? Do you feel like that's the platform to share that type of information? Because I feel like you're on a self-growth process and always creating that for yourself. Is that interjected into your programs, or is that primarily on the podcast?
That's a great question. When I first started the podcast, I just wanted to get people that had large social media followings so that I could grow the podcast, right? I don't remember exactly when, but I think I read a Tim Ferriss article where he said, if you want to be interesting, you have to be interested. And so I completely shifted my kind of focus on the podcast, where from then on I would only interview people that I wanted to learn about. And you always hear like on social media or whatever, like, be authentic. And so this just really resonated with me. Like, so now I'm going to interview people that I really want to learn from, and it's going to be more authentic. And so I knew like this won't resonate, or it might not resonate with as many people. It definitely won't resonate with everyone, but it's going to be better because this is the real me. And that's why I talk about the stuff that I do, is because I really care about it. In terms of, is this is it only on the podcast or in the programs as well? This is something that we're, in our weekly team meetings and all of our team meetings, this is really what we talk about. It is challenging to insert into a training program though. But with that said, like when you sign up for one of our programs, you get input into this, well, at least Brute Body for now, and we're working on the others as well. But you get an indoctrination series of emails. And in that indoctrination series is a ton of education on all of this kind of stuff, a ton of exercises and stuff like that to either learn about things like vulnerability or to practice like effective goal setting and stuff like that.
That's awesome. That's good. Did you have any questions, Nicole? Yeah. I always like to ask her because she's like, you didn't ask this.
Yeah.
Man, well, that's all super exciting and powerful, stories and information. Where kind of now with your journey, kind of what's the vision of Brute and what's next for you guys?
Well, first off, we have a million ideas of like other programs that we want to create and other industries that we want to be in, say for instance, collegiate strength and conditioning. And this is kind of a theme that I'm sure you'll hear and anyone listening will hear. We've constantly been bringing it back to let's go deeper into what we're already doing rather than going wider. So we're trying to create the infrastructure and the quality in all of the programs that we want to create as much quality, the highest quality possible before we continue to branch out. So we don't want a single issue with the app that we use. We want all of the videos that we use to be of the highest quality. We want everyone to be getting their progress reports the same exact way every single month. We're teaching our coaches motivational interviewing right now. So we want all of those things to be in place, right? That infrastructure, so that when we do branch out, we already have a really, really solid base. In the past, we've tried to expand too quickly, and it just leads to more of a mediocre product or service. So we're really just focused on increasing the quality, and then we have a million ideas. I don't know where we're going to go first.
Man, that's awesome. Well, Mike, we appreciate you. You go by Mike. I call you Michael.
Michael, either.
Michael. We really appreciate you coming on, man, and just sharing. We're really interested in what you do and sharing what you do from our coaches here in your podcast. If it's the perfect day formula, and just the insights that you share. So it's an honor, man, and we look forward to tracking you and seeing what success you guys, have in the future. So thank you.
Likewise, brother. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on the Operator Podcast. Please join us on our virtual platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we will see you soon.